Today, you'll discover the story of Rudolf, the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The only son of Empress Elisabeth, the legendary Sissi, Rudolf became the central figure in one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, the tragic Mayerling incident. The prince was found dead at the age of 30, alongside his young lover, a scandal that unleashed a true succession crisis within the empire. But before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you enjoy the video, and share this incredible story with your friends. I promise you, this tale surpasses any fiction. To all those who have been with us from the start, my sincerest thanks. Our community keeps growing every day. And to those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy this fascinating story. On August 21st, 1858, Empress Elisabeth was in Luxembourg when her labor began. The delivery was long and difficult, but thanks to the dedication and skill of the medical team, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria was finally able to hold the long-awaited heir in his arms. He made no effort to hide his pride or his joy as he received the congratulations of the dynasty's members, the most distinguished figures of the court, and the high-ranking officers of the empire. Meanwhile, Elisabeth lay bedridden, weaker than ever. She pleaded to nurse her son herself, but it was in vain. Archduchess Sophie, her mother-in-law, had already chosen a wet nurse for the newborn. The buildup of milk caused Elisabeth severe fevers over the following weeks. The infant was given the name Rudolf Franz Karl Joseph. The last three names honored his paternal grandfather, Archduke Franz Karl, and his father, Emperor Franz Joseph. The name Rudolf, however, paid tribute to the founder of the Habsburg dynasty, Rudolf I. The emperor also granted his son the honorary title of colonel in all three branches of the imperial armed forces, infantry, cavalry, and navy, solemnly declaring, "I wish that my son, who has been given to me by the grace of God, shall belong to my brave army from the very moment he enters this world." During the first months of Rudolf's life, his mother Sissi remained ill and deeply depressed. It had been barely a year since the death of her eldest daughter, Sophie, who had passed away at the age of 2 during the imperial couple's journey to Hungary. Rudolf was the third of the 4 imperial children, and the only boy. Like his older sister Gisela, he grew up almost entirely without his mother's presence. Sissi found countless reasons to flee Vienna. She needed to escape her husband, her mother-in-law, the suffocating court life, and the endless ceremonies that meant nothing to her. The children were raised almost entirely by their grandmother, Archduchess Sophie. From the moment each was born, Sophie would take them to her own apartments, convinced that her daughter-in-law, Empress Elisabeth, lacked the maturity to raise them properly. Before turning 6, Rudolf could still be considered a happy child. The emotional bond he shared with his sister Gisela was deep and sincere, and easy to understand. They depended on one another, and both depended on their grandmother, Sophie. Their father, though affectionate, was distant, completely consumed by the duties of an emperor. Thus, Gisela became Rudolf's main emotional anchor. She took her role as the older sister with tenderness and devotion, always loving, always protective. But when Rudolf turned 6, he was separated from the person he loved most, his sister. His father, the emperor, believed it was time to toughen him up and turn him into a proper soldier. The army was Franz Joseph's greatest pride. He was seldom seen without his uniform. And so, the young prince was placed under the authority of Count Leopold Gondracourt, a strict military man with an unyielding temper, chosen precisely for those qualities. In the emperor's eyes, he was the ideal figure to forge the character of his heir. Naturally, Franz Joseph never stopped to consider the effect such an upbringing might have on the child's mind. Rudolf was deeply sensitive, shy, anxious, and easily frightened. Yet from the age of 6, he was subjected to exhausting physical training that lasted for endless hours. With his harsh, commanding voice, the Count would bark orders so loudly that his words echoed across the palace courtyard. Rudolf tried to keep in step, holding his weapon exactly as instructed, while Gondrecourt pointed out every mistake without ever uttering a single word of encouragement. But the worst was not the physical exercise. As grueling as the drills were, the so-called imperial strengthening plan included punishments far more cruel. Gondrecourt was determined to crush every trace of fear in the boy, no matter the method. He would lock Rudolf alone in a dark room at night, telling him that a wild boar had been released inside, or wake him with gunshots fired into the air. And if Rudolf cried, he was punished with freezing baths. These were acts of genuine torment designed to forge the character of the little heir. The Count's brutality soon took its toll. Rudolf stopped complaining, unable to confide his pain to anyone, neither his father nor his grandmother. But the suffering began to show in his frail body. He lost weight, suffered nervous fits, and could barely eat. Often he would wake drenched in sweat, trembling and feverish. It seems almost unimaginable that Archduchess Sophie, a loving grandmother, failed to see that this harsh regime was destroying the boy's health. On the contrary, she was convinced that the Count's methods were admirable, believing he was turning her grandson's weakness into strength. It was then that Joseph Latour, a court official, jurist, and frequent companion of the emperor on his travels, decided to act. Seeing that the situation had become unbearable, he informed the Empress of the cruel treatment her son was enduring. At last, Elisabeth became fully aware of what was happening, and for the first time in her life, she used every ounce of her influence to protect Rudolf. She did not hesitate to resort even to emotional blackmail. She vowed to leave the Viennese court forever and threatened to provoke a public scandal unless her son was removed from that man's care. She even presented the emperor with a written declaration, firm and commanding in tone. It is my will that I be granted absolute authority over all matters concerning the children, the choice of those who surround them, their place of residence, and full control of their education. In short, that from this day until they reach adulthood, every decision regarding them shall be mine alone. With those words, Empress Elisabeth demanded complete control over the education of her children. Archduchess Sophie, desperate, tried to persuade the emperor of the danger in entrusting such a delicate matter, the upbringing of the heir, to a woman she deemed irresponsible. But faced with Elisabeth's unwavering determination, Franz Joseph yielded almost instantly, disregarding both his mother's opinion and his own reservations. That victory for the Empress marked the beginning of a new chapter in Rudolf's life. The first step Elisabeth took was to order a thorough medical examination for the boy. She then appointed Joseph Latour as his new tutor. Under Latour's guidance, Rudolf immersed himself in the study of natural sciences, history, and politics. Other fields, such as art and literature, never truly captured his interest. Yet even though his mother had rescued him from the cruelty of his previous upbringing, the damage was already done. Irreversible damage. Rudolf carried within him deep emotional scars, lingering fears, and bouts of depression that would follow him for the rest of his life. Around the age of 10, his youngest sister, Mary Vetsera, was born, the last child of the imperial couple. Rudolf felt a fierce, almost obsessive jealousy toward her. Empress Elisabeth, who had been so distant from her elder children, poured all her love and attention into the little girl. Rudolf could never understand why his mother devoted so much affection to Mary Vetsera and so little to him and Gisela. Latour remained his tutor from 1864 until the end of 1877. When Rudolf completed his studies, he bid him farewell with genuine tenderness, affectionately calling him "my dear old man." An intriguing detail. During a trip to England, Rudolf secretly tried to meet the naturalist Charles Robert Darwin, whom he deeply admired, but to his great disappointment, he never succeeded. The Crown Prince loved hunting and was a skilled marksman, but his fascination with nature went far beyond sport. He had a deep passion for ornithology, especially birds of prey, and often spent hours sketching the species he observed. His father, however, disapproved. The emperor considered such interests unworthy of a future ruler and eventually forbade them altogether. As time passed, their relationship grew colder. They were opposites in every way. It was said that when they shared the same room, an uncomfortable silence filled the air, broken only when they spoke about hunting. Rudolf was as liberal as his father was absolutist, and their ideological divide became increasingly impossible to ignore. The young prince dreamed of a freer, more progressive empire, a vision utterly incompatible with the rigid conservative system of Franz Joseph. His first love came in 1877, during a stay in Prague, where he met a young Jewish woman, someone who did not belong to the nobility and lacked the rank required to become the wife of a crown prince. The emperor, fearing the girl would end up as nothing more than a mistress, quickly arranged for her to marry another man. But not long after, she died, leaving Rudolf heartbroken and consumed by grief. He would remember her fondly for the rest of his life. Years earlier, when he was still a child, his parents had arranged a possible union with Infanta Pilar de Borbon y Bourbon, sister of King Alfonso XII of Spain, who was also Rudolf's personal friend. Yet fate intervened once again. The Infanta died suddenly in 1879. Finally, in 1880, Rudolf traveled to the court of King Leopold of Belgium to formally ask for the hand of his daughter, Stephanie. A young princess, wealthy, devoutly Catholic, and of impeccable lineage, she seemed the perfect bride for a future emperor. But from the very beginning, their marriage was nothing more than a facade. Rudolf sought her hand solely for reasons of state. He was not in love with her, and in time, he never would be. On May 10, 1881, a lavish ceremony sealed their union. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale, an imperial love story, but it was all an illusion. On September 2, 1883, their first and only child was born, Elisabeth Marie of Austria. From that moment on, the relationship between Rudolf and Stephanie began to crumble beyond repair. He sought refuge from his unhappiness, from the suffocating pressures of court life, and from the weight of his father's authority, in alcohol and in the arms of other women. Rudolf became a notorious womanizer. He had countless affairs with noble ladies, courtiers, wealthy bourgeois women, humble girls, even prostitutes. In Vienna's taverns, he found fleeting relief from his inner emptiness. In one of them, he met Mitzi Kasper, a courtesan who catered to high-ranking gentlemen. Rudolf enjoyed her company, visited her often, and over the years, Mitzi developed genuine feelings for him. A strange mix of tenderness, affection, and pity. She became his favorite, though not his only companion. One day, Rudolf asked her to join him on a special trip. A journey, he said, where they would die together. Mitzi, who had heard every kind of proposal in her life, but never one so dark, refused immediately. Terrified, she went straight to the police and reported what had happened. She told the officers about the prince's intentions, but no one believed her. No one could imagine that the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire might be planning something so desperate. Meanwhile, Rudolf had begun to express his liberal ideas in articles published under a pseudonym. In them, he openly criticized, and often mocked, the authoritarian politics of his father, Emperor Franz Joseph. His reckless life, marked by excess and scandal, soon brought devastating consequences for his wife, Stephanie. Rudolf infected her with a venereal disease, and the mercury treatment she received left her sterile. She would never be able to give the empire a male heir. The emperor, furious, scolded his son harshly, disappointed in him yet again. Stephanie, for her part, grew to despise Rudolf and would never forgive him. Broken and humiliated, Rudolf begged her for a divorce, but she was unyielding. "You'll have to endure me. I will never grant you a divorce. I will never set you free to marry another woman." In 1888, Countess Mary Vetsera, cousin to Crown Prince Rudolf, introduced him to her young friend, Mary Vetsera. The 17-year-old baroness was utterly fascinated by the prince. Since childhood, she had dreamed of meeting him. And when that dream finally came true, she fell hopelessly in love. Rudolf, too, was drawn to her, and soon a passionate secret affair began. It wasn't long before word of their romance spread through the imperial court and inevitably reached the ears of the emperor himself. On January 26, 1889, Franz Joseph confronted his son in a violent argument. The subject, that scandalous, forbidden love. He demanded that Rudolf end the relationship at once. Desperate, Rudolf replied that all he wanted was to divorce his wife and marry his beloved Mary. He had even appealed to the Pope for an annulment, but his request was denied. 2 days later, on January 28th, Rudolf decided to spend a few days at his hunting lodge in the small village of Mayerling. He was accompanied by several friends, among them his brother-in-law, Prince Philip of Saxony. No one knew that he had also brought along his secret lover, Mary Vetsera. On the morning of the 29th, Rudolf excused himself from the hunt, claiming he wasn't feeling well. A mere cold, he said, and remained in the lodge with Mary. That evening, when the others returned, they dined together. Rudolf retired early, still insisting he was unwell, and went back to his chambers, where Mary awaited him. The next morning, the servants went to wake the prince, but he didn't answer. After several failed attempts, they forced open the door and found a horrifying scene. Rudolf and Mary were dead, each with a gunshot wound to the head. That tragedy would go down in history as the Mayerling incident, one of the greatest mysteries of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Countless theories emerged. Some claimed it was a lover's pact, a joint suicide born of desperation, two souls who could not bear to live apart. Others insisted it was an assassination carried out by the Austrian Secret Service, fearful that Rudolf's liberal ideals might threaten the stability of the empire. Another version accused the French Secret Service, alleging that Rudolf had withdrawn from a secret political agreement to overthrow his own father. And there were even those who blamed his wife, embittered by rejection and humiliation. The official version declared that Rudolf, in a moment of madness, had murdered Mary Vetsera before turning the gun on himself. But that explanation was met with fierce skepticism. Several witnesses swore they had seen the prince's body bearing multiple injuries, bruises, lacerations, even a mutilated hand. None of these details appeared in the official report, nor did the authorities mention Mary Vetsera's presence. They sought, at any cost, to conceal the fact that the married heir to the throne had killed his 17-year-old mistress and then taken his own life. A scandal that struck at the very heart of the monarchy. The young woman's body was removed from the hunting lodge in the dead of night by several family members. According to witnesses, 2 of her uncles carried her, dressed in her finest clothes, and to disguise the act, they placed a broomstick along her back to keep her upright during the carriage ride, creating the illusion that she was still alive. She was taken to a nearby cemetery, placed in a simple wooden coffin, and buried without ceremony. Rudolf, by contrast, received a grand and solemn funeral. The church, which normally forbade religious services for those who took their own lives, made an exception, arguing that the prince had acted in a moment of madness and had not been fully aware of his actions. On February 5, 1889, he was laid to rest with full honors in the imperial crypt of the Capuchin Church in Vienna, alongside the other members of the Habsburg family.